CM183 comes with more than 1,000 prime loop samples, and we're going to use a few of them to make this beat. We're using Ableton Live for this tutorial. You can get a demo of that from www.ableton.com. Okay, so let's start out by setting the project tempo to 144 BPM, and we'll set up an 8-bar section to loop. Start by dragging BPM 75 G sharp minor future trap mixed beat 01 from the Trap Attack Trap Loops folder onto an audio track. We want a fill at the end of the 8-bar section, so highlight and delete the last quarter bar of the beat. To create a fill, we're going to use the snare drum. Create an instrument track in Live and add a simpler instrument to it. Open the Dubstep Gladiators Gladiator one-shots folder and drag the BPM 140 B minor Twisted Fire Snare 2.wav sample into Simpler. We want to control the volume level of the snare using the velocity of the MIDI note sent to it, so set the vel level to 100% and turn up the overall level to minus 1.69 dB. We're turning it up this loud because we're going to run it into an overdrive. This is too loud for the moment, so let's put a limiter after the Simpler. Okay, so let's add that overdrive effect before the limiter. We'll set the center frequency to 1.36 kHz and the bandwidth to 4.93. You can see when the snare plays that the limiter is being worked hard. Set Simpler's amplitude output sustain level to minus infinity dB and the decay to 188 milliseconds. Create a MIDI part so that we can play the snare sample over the final half bar of our loop. Copy the MIDI pattern we've used here to create a snare roll. Don't forget to include the velocity level variation. These volume changes help it sound more like something a human would play. Bring up the clip's envelope editor by clicking the small E button, then click the pitch bend button. Add a slight pitch bend down over the last quarter bar as we have here to give the snare a kind of like a Dirty South roll sort of feel. The snare needs a little more high end to sit properly with the beat, so add an EQ8 before the limiter and use the high shelf band to add 6.19 dB at 1.3 kHz. Let's add some more sounds to spice up the rest of the beat. Create 2 new audio tracks. On the first, add Snap 06 Get Dirty.wav from the Urban Takeover 2 Urban One Shots folder onto the third beat of every bar. On the next audio track, put Tom 4PL and Tom 6PL from the ATL Stars One Shots folder. Put Tom 4 on the first beat of the second bar and 6 on the second beat of the second bar. Copy the pattern out so it's also on the 4th, 6th and 8 bars. This creates an interplay with the percussive noise in the main beat loop. Now we've got our beat, let's add some filthy synth bass sounds. Open the official Dubstep Bassline's official loops folder and drag BPM 140 Subtron A.wav onto a new audio track. Change its time stretching algorithm to Complex Pro. This bass line is 4 bars long, but we don't need the first half of the third bar or the second half of the fourth bar. Copy out the 4-bar sequence onto the next set of 4 bars, giving us a bass part for the whole 8 bars. Put a limiter on the master channel so that we don't clip it. To make the bass sit with a beat better, we're going to sidechain compress it. The catch is, because we're using a loop, there's no kick or snare to use as a sidechain trigger. Now, we could create silent kick and snare tracks, but that's a little bit boring, and there's an easier way. We can use the filter built into the compressor effects sidechain input so that the sidechain is triggered by a particular frequency. Side of the bass channel, add a compressor effect to it. Bring up the sidechain controls by clicking the triangle button at its top left hand corner. Activate the sidechain input by clicking the sidechain button and set the sidechain input in the audio from drop down menu to the track with a beat loop on it. Click the headphones button, and when you play the project back you'll hear the sidechain input, which is the beat. Click the EQ button to activate the sidechain's filter and use the freak button to centre in on the kick. Set the frequency to 72.9 kHz. Click the headphone icon again to turn off the monitoring, then bring down the threshold to -15.6 dB and turn up the ratio to infinite. On playback you'll see the compressor responding to the sidechain input, and the bass will now duck out when the kick plays accordingly. Make a copy of the compressor on the same track. We're going to change settings of this new instance to work off the snare. Set the freak to 551 Hz with a Q of 7.32. Set the threshold to -4.46 decibels. In this case it's not possible to isolate the snare perfectly, but we still get the effects we're after. Let's add another effect to give the bassline more movement and interest. Add the auto filter off the second compressor. Set the cutoff to 4 kHz and the Q to 2.47. We're going to use the effect's built-in LFO to modulate the fill's cutoff. Activate its tempo sync by clicking the little note icon on the right and set the rate to a half. Set the amount to 19.3 and set its mode to band reject. Now when you play the bassline back you'll hear there's a lot of stereo movement in the mids and highs. For the final touch, let's get a bit raved up, add a new audio track and add BPM 140 earwax synth loop from the Rave Step Rave Loops folder. Set the start point of the sample to the last quarter of the first bar. Now this gives us a kind of a single note that we can pitch around and create our own melody with. Set the time stretch algorithm to Complex Pro. And we're just going to create a little riff. Let's add another note, and this time we'll turn the warping off and just manually pitch it down a whole octave, and this will give us a kind of nice raved up sort of effect. Copy the sidechain compression over from the bassline track. Let's also add some reverb. There you go, that's our beat. Hopefully we've shown you how you can tweak the included samples to kind of get your own flavour and make your own sound.